Imagine discovering three ancient dog breeds separated by thousands of miles, all carrying the same bizarre signature. That's the mystery of the Ridgeback. In southern Africa, they called it a lion hunting mark. In Thailand, they bred it into a dog nobody else was allowed to own. In Vietnam, it nearly vanished entirely, saved by accident inside a prison colony. None of these dogs ever met. None of these people ever compared notes. And yet the same genetic signature, the same fold of skin, the same whorls, the same hidden birth defect lurking underneath it, shows up in all three. This is either one of the strangest coincidences in the history of dog breeding, or proof that a single mutation crossed oceans thousands of years before anyone wrote it down. Nobody has fully settled which. That's the Ridgeback mystery, and before we get to the lion legends and the prison island in the Gulf of Thailand, we need to talk about what the ridge actually is, because it isn't decorative. It's a fault line. The ridge is a strip of hair that grows in the opposite direction to the rest of the coat, forming a whorl or crown near the shoulders. Breeders have spent 2 centuries treating it as an aesthetic signature. Geneticists, when they finally sequenced it in the 2000s, found something less romantic. The ridge comes from a duplication of DNA on canine chromosome 18, a region holding fibroblast growth factor genes that control skin patterning during embryonic development. 1 copy of that duplication gives you the ridge. 2 copies sharply raise the odds of dermoid sinus, a narrow tube of skin and tissue that fails to fully separate from the neural tube in the womb and can run down toward the spinal cord itself. This means, simply put, that you cannot breed for a stronger ridge without raising the odds of the deformity underneath it. The most famous of the 3 starts with the Khoikhoi people of southern Africa, who kept a semi-domesticated hunting dog with a dorsal ridge centuries before any European ship reached the Cape. When Dutch and later British settlers arrived, they crossed their Great Danes, Bloodhounds, and Mastiffs with the Khoikhoi dogs already there. What emerged was built for one of the most dangerous jobs in sporting dog history: locating and holding lions at bay for mounted hunters, without being expected to kill the animal itself. That's the root of the name African Lion Hound, and of the myth that these dogs were bred to fight lions. They weren't. A dog that actually engaged a lion rarely lived long enough to be bred from. The formal history starts in 1922, when Rhodesian breeders led by Francis Barnes met in Bulawayo and wrote a standard, borrowing the structure wholesale from the contemporary Dalmatian standard and simply substituting in the ridge as the defining trait. It's a small decision that says a lot about how colonial-era kennel clubs treated indigenous dogs generally. Not by documenting what the dog already was, but by translating it into a vocabulary London would register. The breed reached the UK and American kennel clubs over the following decades, becoming the first sub-Saharan African breed to gain that kind of international standing. While Rhodesian breeders were writing standards, an entirely separate ridged dog had already existed for centuries in eastern Thailand, undisturbed largely because nobody outside a couple of provinces ever got the chance to interfere with it. The Thai Ridgeback, or Ma Thai Lang An, developed in isolation in Chantaburi and Trat, likely descending from ancient Southeast Asian pariah-type dogs shaped by survival rather than any breeding program. Boxed in by mountains and coastline, the population never diluted the way most landrace dogs do once trade routes bring in outside blood. What sets it apart from its African counterpart is less the ridge and more everything around it. An athletic, almost feline build, prick ears, and a temperament built for working alone rather than alongside mounted hunters. It stayed essentially unknown outside Thailand until the late 20th century, when growing interest in rare breeds finally brought it to Western kennel clubs. It's still one of the least common purebred dogs most people have never heard of. The third Ridgeback nearly didn't survive to have a history told about it. It comes from Phu Quoc, a Vietnamese island in the Gulf of Thailand that served as a prison colony under French colonial rule and later South Vietnam. Dogs there were kept by prisoners and local fishing communities alike, used for hunting and guarding in terrain that made escape by land pointless anyway. As crossbreeding diluted dog populations on the Vietnamese mainland through the mid-20th century, the island's isolation, the same isolation that made it a prison, accidentally shielded its dogs from that dilution. By the 1990s, conservationists recognized the breed as critically endangered, reduced to a small population almost entirely confined to the island. The Vietnamese government backed formal preservation efforts, and the Vietnam Kennel Association recognized the breed in 2016, making it one of the most recently formalized Ridgeback breeds, despite arguably being among the oldest ridge dog populations in existence. It's still rare even inside Vietnam, and almost unseen outside it. So here's the actual puzzle. Southern Africa, eastern Thailand, and an island off Vietnam share no documented breeding program, no trade in dogs, no obvious contact between the human populations who shaped these breeds. And yet all three carry the same chromosome 18 duplication, producing the same ridge and, in a meaningful share of cases, the same dermoid sinus. There are really only two explanations. One, this is convergent mutation, the same relatively simple genetic change arising independently more than once, which does happen, especially with mutations easy to produce and quick for owners to notice and select for. Or two, this is a single ancient mutation, present in a dog population that existed before these groups split apart, carried outward along maritime trade and migration routes we have no written record of. Genetic studies haven't settled it. Both explanations are still live. What isn't in dispute is the cost of selecting for that ridge. Every Ridgeback breed club today runs some version of the conversation South African breeders were quietly having in the 1950s. How do you keep a defining trait that is genetically indistinguishable from a birth defect risk? Modern breeders test for dermoid sinus, and some lines have deliberately bred for the ridgeless Ridgeback, all the temperament and history of the breed. None of the trait that made it famous, specifically to dodge the health risk. It's a strange endpoint for three breeds built around one visible feature. The healthiest version of a Ridgeback, by a fairly direct reading of the genetics, might be the one without a ridge at all. 3 continents, 1 mutation, or 3 copies of the same accident. A trait born from a fold in the neural tube that humans decided was beautiful before anyone knew what it actually was. That's the ridge, and it's still not entirely settled science.